Hi everyone, today I'm going to talk to you about a political conversation miracle, how to talk to the other side successfully and even enjoy it. I know that might sound crazy. I promise you I'm going to show you today how to do that. If you are fed up with the whole political situation in terms of not even being able to talk about it anymore or having really intense conversations with the other side, you are going to want to pay attention to this. I'm going to share with you why this whole thing seems so crazy, why it's escalating and getting so polarized. And then I'm going to share with you what specifically you can do. Again, specific techniques that you can use right now that are going to make those conversations go better. All right, so first of all, why does this all seem so crazy? And especially sometimes you might have people in your life or friends or family you've known for a long time, and they're thinking so differently in ways you just really didn't expect. And it's causing us to break apart and to begin to put stress on our relationship. So what's going on here? Well, what's different, I mean, we've always had differences, but what's underneath this is very, very threatening to our brain. And if you watched previous videos I talked about how we kind of have this reptilian brain that comes out anytime we feel threatened or scared, and it's an attacking brain, and it doesn't serve us very well in these times, but this is the one that a lot of us have going. And meanwhile, we have this cortex, which is our thinking brain, and this is really the one that we need. But when we feel threatened, this brain can't function. And so a big part of the problem we have right now is that we're wired backwards for dealing with all of this. And I'll talk more about that, and I've talked about that a little bit in other videos. But the idea is that the stakes are very high. And so when the stakes are high, we get very concerned about being right, about getting our way across, about making sure these conversations go the way that we want. And so it's adding a whole nother layer of intensity to all of this. Now, so we have high stakes. All right. So there's a second thing going on that's driving this deep polarization, and that is difference of values down underneath. There's a really interesting TED Talk by Rob Willer, and it's on how to have better political conversations. And he cited some research in there, which is very interesting, about the values they've discovered and the differences between liberals and conservatives. And I'm talking here about in the United States. And so what they found in their studies was that, let's see if you can see that here, conservatives tend to value loyalty, respect for authority, and moral purity. Okay, so these are the things that tend to be very important to conservatives. And then for liberals, we have equity and fairness, care, can you use that backwards? Care and protection. All right, so, and it's not to say that each side doesn't value these, it's that they value these ones on their side more than perhaps some of the other values. And so what happens is that, take something like building a wall, for example. Well, if you're conservative and it's about loyalty, loyalty is a big deal. Loyalty to your country, to your family, to your tribe. And so you want to protect the people in your community and your family. So you want to take care of the people here. And, we talk about America first and that. And so that's that idea of loyalty. And yet, if you're a liberal, then, and so the way that plays out with the wall would be that you want to put up that wall because you want to take care of the people inside here first and make sure that things are okay here before we try to take care of other people. Whereas if you're a liberal, you believe more in equity, fairness, care. So you really care about the people, the immigrants and that who are outside of our country just as well as you do inside. And so in that sense, then a wall doesn't make sense. All right. So that's kind of the idea about down underneath these issues. And if you look at all of them and you take those values, you begin to see a little bit about why we disagree fundamentally about those. Okay. And maybe, okay, so maybe you understand that. You go, okay, I see these different values, but I see the other side acting unethically or immorally, which no matter who you are, that's wrong. So how do you explain that? Well, the way you explain that is with something called confirmation bias. And this is essentially the idea that we see what we want to see. This is based on research that shows, it's really fascinating. For example, they've put up identical footage. They put up a political debate And they have, and in this case, it was Republicans and Democrats watching. And at the end, each side said that their candidate won the debate. And they've repeated this with sporting events as well, where they'll put up identical coverage of a particular sporting incident, and they'll have the opposite teams watching it, and both sides will claim that the other team was responsible for the unsportsmanlike conduct. So this is really an interesting thing, this confirmation bias. We do it all day, every day. We're just unaware of it. So basically, our brain in every moment is trying to reinforce what it already believes and negate anything that falls outside of that. So when it comes to something like the other side being unethical, we're really ready to see that because we're looking for all the evidence we can find of why the other side is bad. But we don't want to see it on our side. So, for example, if this was happening in our candidate, we would probably overlook it or rationalize it or kind of sidestep it in the same way the other side is from our perspective, right? So the idea is this confirmation bias. We are not really seeing an accurate view of reality. We are always out there looking to find ways to reinforce what we believe and, again, to negate the other side. So if you think about this, so if we're all out there doing this, can you see how that could begin to cause really deep divides? Because the more debates I watch, the more articles I read, the more news media coverage I watch, the more conversations I have, every time I have another engagement, I'm looking for all the reasons why I'm right, all the reasons why they're wrong. And every time I have one, I get a little more firm in my belief that this is how things are. And so we're all doing that. And so we're becoming further and further apart. All right, so just so you kind of understand what's going on here. And so basically the summary here is that, first of all, we are all rational, all right? The reason we are all thinking and doing what we're doing is because of these beliefs we have, because of these values that we hold. As, quote, crazy as it looks on the outside, it's completely rational. If you had grown up and had the same experiences as this other person, you would very likely be thinking the same way they do too. So we're all out there acting rationally. It's just that we have different ways of coming at things. And the second thing to understand then is that we have a fundamental values conflict. Down at the base, we think differently about what's important and how to make things happen, right? So that's causing the issues. And then the third thing to remember is this confirmation bias. And every moment, all of us on both sides are reinforcing what we believe and trying to find flaws with the other side. And all three of these together are what is creating this very deep polarization situation. All right, so what do we do about it? Well, I want to share a story with you to begin this. It was really funny when a couple months ago I was talking with a friend, and she happens to be a liberal, and she was very concerned about all the things that she saw going on, and basically said, the world is going to hell. And I just remember the conversation because it was very, very poignant. And then a couple weeks later, actually recently after the election, I happened to be talking with a neighbor who is conservative. And he said he was concerned, about how the election had turned out and said that the world is going to hell. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? It really struck me. Identical words to describe this situation. And it became so clear that we actually all have the same fears on the opposite sides, right? Isn't that interesting? They're afraid the world's going to hell. We're afraid the world's going to hell. Like we all have the same fear. How's that? Now, if you dive down underneath, I'd like to suggest that we want the same things as well. We all want world peace. We all want a better world for our children. We all want to feel safe and be loved and be successful and have opportunities to be successful, right? We all want the same things. But again, we've got we've learned different ways of getting there, of beliefs about how to do it, and about what's really most important as we do that. But underneath, we want the same thing. So that's important to understand in terms of what we do with this, right? All right, so how? So how do we have these conversations then, and how do we engage with them? There are 5 steps, and this is something that I outlined in a previous video on 5 tips for having polarizing conversations, but here I'm going to go into some real specifics with it, and specifically in terms of these political conversations. So the first tip was to feel good, to think good. And I introduced these puppets in the video before about how we have this reptilian brain that is at the base of our head, and that is really our primitive brain that was first formed. And when we get afraid or we feel a threat, this brain rules. And it's the one that fights and flights and flees and does all that. And meanwhile, we've got this cortex, which is our thinking brain. This is the one that can come up with good solutions, analyze, think clearly. This is the social brain that can connect with other people, that can really listen, that can learn, okay? This brain does no learning, listening. This one fights, it flees. And when you're in a polarizing conversation, this is the brain that's operating. And this is why we get more and more polarized, and we don't come together, because this brain is absent. And this is just a product of the fact that our brain evolves much, much more slowly than we do. We need a different brain in today's world, but our brain is much older than it needs to be. So we have to learn how to work with it, and that's what I'm sharing with you. So this first one is feel good to think good. And this is not easy to do. And so I actually have 5 keys here to help you with this. And this, so let's say you come across somebody, whether it's at the dinner table or wherever it is, and the political conversation comes up and they're on the other side. All right. And you can kind of feel that reptile start to pop up, like, ooh, the hair begins to raise up. What can you do? So here's 5 things. First of all, understand that, let's see, they are rational, okay? They are rational. So what you're doing here is you're talking to your brain. You're trying to talk the reptile down, and you're trying to talk the cortex up. This person's rational. They're not crazy. We say that. That's the first thing we think, because the reptile brain wants to protect us. Run! You got a crazy person. No, they're rational. They just have different beliefs. They have different values. It's okay. Remember, it's okay. Number 2, remember, we are both biased. That includes you. This is the unfun part to acknowledge, right? I'm biased. I'm not seeing this truthfully. I'm looking for what I want to see, and I'm looking to negate what they're saying. And in fact, I'm probably defending if I'm doing that. So just know you're biased. So just pause for a moment and go, okay, wait a minute. Let me just open here and recognize that I'm looking at this situation through filters. Number 3, we want the same things. So it might not look like it, but remember, down deep underneath, we all want world peace. We all want a better world for our children. We all want to love and be loved and be seen and be heard. We want the same things. So remember, there's common ground here, even if it doesn't look like it. Number 4, I can learn from this. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. You don't learn a whole lot from people who think the same way that you do, right? You sit there and you basically rehash and just reinforce everything you already believe. People who think differently from you give you a tremendous opportunity to learn. This is really where you have, and I'll share more about this in a minute too, but this is a huge benefit of this, is for you to actually shift what you believe and see reality more clearly, because, as we said earlier, you're biased, right? You're biased. And then number 5, this is a big one. I love this. It's just a conversation. It's just a conversation. But what happens? You get talking, and what happens? The reptile's like, it goes down the big path. It's not just a conversation, because I'm going to talk to this person, and if this person believes this, and he talks to that person, and he does this, and next thing you know, they're going to pass that law, and the next thing you know, the world is going to blow up. We're going to die, right? Your brain isn't seeing it as just a conversation. It's seeing it as the first step to death, right? So, but if you can get your cortex up and go, wait a minute, We're just having a conversation. We're just talking. I'm not in danger. I mean, unless somebody's pointing a gun at you or something, right? Typically, we're not in danger. We're just having a conversation. So these by themselves aren't going to get you there, but the idea is this is the first step. The first step is feel good to think good. And those are 5 ways that you can begin to help get that cortex back on top for the conversation. So that's the first one. Now, the second one, the second tip for how to have these conversations then is to remember that it all makes sense, just not to you. As I said before, they have different values. They have different ways of coming at it. If you could step out and look at all that, this makes perfect sense. The world is rational. There's no crazy people. There's no people doing things that are just like, oh, that makes no sense. It all makes sense. You just can't see all the different moving pieces in there. All right. Again, none of these by themselves are going to get you there, but all of these are little steps to help get that cortex engaged. Number 3, flight. Don't fight. So if you find yourself in that conversation, you've gone through those 5 things, you've tried to remind you, but you still feel, that reptile's like, I just can't. Don't engage. Okay? Don't have the conversation. If you can't truly be curious and interested and in a good place, you are not going to have an effective conversation. What are you going to do? You're going to reinforce your bias for what you believe, and you're actually going to reinforce their bias as well, because you're going to end up fighting and defending. And every time you do that, you both just get further and further entrenched. So you are contributing to the polarization. So own that. If you engage in a conversation with your reptile, you are contributing to the very issue of polarization that you say you don't want. You just didn't know it, okay? So cut yourself some slack. It's okay. Don't ever beat yourself up, but just understand we are the problem, which is really good news because we can control so we can do something about it. So that's number 3. Flight, don't fight. So then number 4, if you can stay in the conversation then, is to get curious, not critical. How do you do that? Well, you ask questions like, what can I learn from this other person? How do they think this way? Again, you can't do it if your reptile's out. If you're angry, frustrated, you can't be curious. So this is only if you manage to stay neutral and to stay in the conversation. What can I learn? Get curious. You might find some really fascinating things. Now, this is probably the most difficult part of all, but what you can do is actually ask, how do you get curious? Well, as I said, what can I learn? What can I find in there that's of value? So here's something really radical. If you're serious about this and you can be in a curious place, I'm going to give you 2 questions that will change everything. This is a very simple idea, but it is not easy. Here's the 2 questions. Number 1, what good can I find? And number 2, how are these values serving us now? Okay. So what good can I find? How are these values? If you notice the values coming up, right, about loyalty or whatever it is, or maybe it's not even in a conversation, but if you ask yourself these questions, what good can I find in the other side? What good can I find in these values? If you're a let's say you are a liberal, right? And here's what you're valuing if you're a liberal, right? But here's a conservative value, loyalty. So if you're a liberal, say, okay, loyalty. I mean, how is that serving us now in the world? In what ways does this value of loyalty on the conservative platform really make the world better? How does it make our country better? How does it make life better? Same thing if you're a liberal, right? I'm sorry, if you're a conservative, right? Go in and take a look at equity and fairness. In what ways does that make the world better? How is that making our country better? In what ways are those values serving us, serving our democracy, right? So that's the opportunity here. And it's so difficult because the reptile's like, no, we're going to die. Why? Why? Because the reptile thinks If I go out there and I start looking for the good in the other side, what's going to happen? I'm going to become like them. I'm going to start thinking like them. And what I'd like to ask is, and what's wrong with that? Here's what your brain thinks is wrong. We spent years developing these beliefs to keep us safe and keep us alive. So the brain does not want to change them. The brain thinks, the reptile thinks, this is how I stay alive by believing this. Don't you dare try to change it. But what happens? There's a huge opportunity here to learn, because most of these beliefs, right? So for example, why do some people really why are these beliefs more important to conservatives and these beliefs more important to liberals? Well, because of their life experiences, because of the way they were raised, because of the families they were in and the cultures that they were in. So these aren't necessarily absolutes, right? These are things that we learn along the way. And so when you actually recognize this, you say, oh, well, you know what? I mean, most people have never really questioned them. They just were raised that way. So the opportunity is to look at them and actually question them on both sides. Go in and say, huh, is this really what's most important? Let me look at the other way to think about this. And then what happens if you do change? Like, this is a wonderful thing, because now this is your real core value, not just the values that were given to you. And if this is really who you are and what you believe, you've got it. Now you really got it. It's not because it's something you grew up with or you sort of learned along the way. It's because you went out there and you said, yes, this is important to me on my own terms and who I am and who I've become as an adult. And so there's a tremendous opportunity here to really go in and get clear about who you are. And you know what this does? This builds confidence. This is a big part of where confidence comes from. Your power, it builds power because I know who I am. I can stand strong in anything with anybody. I'm clear about what I believe. And I can be totally open to learn and grow because I'm clear about who I am. I'm not worried that I'm going to get sucked in or I'm going to get manipulated or anything like that, right? So that's the opportunity here, is to, in the gift in all of this. All right, so again, this is not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy, right? When your brain wants to fight and you try to stay in the conversation. And so we come to the very last tip in that 5-tip thing that I presented earlier about having these conversations. Number 5 is choose to connect. Choose to connect. It is a choice. It's not simple. It's going to be against what your brain wants to do. You have to talk to yourself. You have to remind yourself of these things. And you have to make a choice to connect or to run away if that's the only thing you can do. It's your choice. You get to choose. But to choose to connect. And I'd like to suggest, as much as this is hard, there are some really good reasons to do this. So first of all, it feels a whole lot better. When you can reduce your negativity, when you can actually stay in conversation or even just feel a little bit better, it feels better, right? Aren't we all so like stressed out and so full of this negative energy? So here's a way to feel better in those relationships. And then number 2 is to strengthen the relationships. I mean, this country was pretty evenly divided in the election. The fact is, half the people think one way and half think the other way. So unless you want to get rid of half of all your friends and work associates, I mean, you've got to find a way to be in relationship with them. So there's a lot at stake here. And number 3, democracy in the US. Like, that's what we're founded on. Democracy only works if people talk to each other and if we can work these things out. And if we continue to get more and more polarized and divided, we aren't going to be able to do that. And what happens when you get that divided and you can't talk it out? You fight, you go to war, right? We don't want that. So this is so important for so many reasons. Yes, you're going to feel better, and yes, you're going to get your relationships together, and for world peace, right, at the end. And there's actually another thing that is probably the biggest reason of all. I don't have time to go into it, but guess what? Being able to be in relationship with somebody who thinks very differently from you is the key to happiness. As you learn to do that, as you learn to navigate that relationship, it will force you to go in and do some work yourself, some interpersonal work, because this other person's triggering things, and I'm not going to go into it, but other people are basically a projection of who we are. And so as we learn to love other people, accept other people, we love and accept ourselves. So this is truly about, in the end, actually personal confidence and happiness and all kinds of good things. So there's so much value that comes out of this beyond just overcoming this, really difficult political situation that we've got going on here. All right, so I hope that was helpful for today. Again, I'm Jackie Kelm, founder of Appreciative Living, where we teach you how to live a really, truly joyful life no matter what is going on, especially in today's world, more important than ever. And I hope you will share these ideas with friends and family, because together we can heal the divides. We don't need to wait for politicians, and we can't. We have to do this ourselves. We need to understand we are the problem and we are the solution. And the great thing is we have 100% control over ourselves, and we can create a great experience in our relationships regardless of what the other people do. They don't have to do anything. We can do this ourselves. It's an inside job. So if you want more information on how to live a happier life and some more support resources, you can visit us at our website at www.appreciativeliving.com. And remember, for this season, and as always, choose to connect. Bye for now.